4 years ago, I lost everything in a single afternoon. Standing in the driveway of the house I grew up in, holding a cardboard box, watching my brother lock the front door from the inside. Today I run a company doing $4.2 million in annual revenue out of a converted warehouse in Austin, Texas. I have a team of 11 people. I have a house with a porch big enough to fit the family I chose to build. And last month, my brother called me for the first time since that afternoon. Not to say sorry, not to explain himself. He needed money. I want to tell you what happened in between. My name is Rachel. I'm 31 years old. I grew up in Akron, Ohio, the middle kid in what looked, from the outside, like a perfectly normal family. We had a split-level house on a quiet street, a dad who coached Little League on weekends, a mom who made too much food every Sunday and sent the leftovers home with everyone. We had holidays and inside jokes and a family group chat. We had the trappings of closeness, but there was always my brother, Derek. 3 years older than me, first in everything. First to drive, first to graduate, first to be handed things without having to ask twice. I used to think I was imagining it. The way my dad's face changed when Derek walked into a room. The way my mom laughed longer at his jokes. The way my ideas at the dinner table got politely nodded at while Derek's got written down on an actual notepad. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that's just how families work. Someone's always the shining one and someone else learns to live in the shade. I was wrong about how long I could live there. My dad started a home renovation business when I was in middle school. Nothing huge. Kitchen remodels, bathroom upgrades, the occasional full gut job on an older house in the suburbs. He called it Mercer Built. It was his whole identity, that name. He wore it on a hat every single day. By the time I was in college, it had grown into something real. 6 employees, a decent reputation in Summit County, a backlog of jobs that stretched 3 months out. I came home after finishing my business degree at Ohio State and I asked my dad if I could help. He said yes, but I understood immediately that my role had a ceiling. Derek was already there, running the client side, shaking hands, taking the meetings. I was handed the back office, the scheduling software nobody had ever properly set up, the invoicing system that was still half paper, the vendor relationships that had been running on handshakes for a decade. Nobody called it important. It was just the stuff that needed doing. I didn't care. I liked the puzzle of it. I spent 4 months untangling the mess, migrating everything to a real system, renegotiating with 2 of our lumber suppliers and saving us close to $18,000 a year. My dad said, "Good job," once. Derek said nothing. The thing I built that actually mattered, I built at night. I had noticed, working in the back office, that there was no decent software for small residential contractors. The big platforms were designed for commercial construction. Too complicated, too expensive, way too many features a 3-person crew would never touch. But the spreadsheet and post-it note system most people like my dad were using was costing them real money in scheduling mistakes and missed follow-ups. I started building something in the gaps between my actual work. A simple job management tool built specifically for residential contractors. Drag-and-drop scheduling, automatic client reminders, a payment tracker that could actually talk to QuickBooks. I worked on it for about 8 months before I showed it to anyone. The first person I showed it to was my dad. I pulled up my laptop at the kitchen table one Sunday after dinner and walked him through it. He leaned in. He asked a few good questions. He said it was interesting. Then Derek, who had been half listening from the couch, came over and looked at the screen. "How long did this take you?" he asked. "About 8 months," I said. He nodded and went back to the couch. I didn't think anything of it. 3 weeks later, I found out. My friend Cassie, she'd gone into commercial real estate after college and ran in circles with people who were always starting things, texted me a link. "Is this yours?" she wrote. It was a pitch deck posted in a contractor industry Facebook group. The product was called Build Track. The screenshots were mine. The workflow was mine. The feature list was mine. Down to the specific language I'd used in my own notes. The person posting it was Derek. He'd shared it as his own concept, already fielding interest from a few small investors, asking if anyone knew contractors who might want to beta test. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time. I want to be honest about what that moment felt like, because I think people sometimes expect rage, and what I actually felt first was something quieter and more devastating than that. It was the specific grief of realizing that someone who shared your childhood had looked at something you made and decided the easiest thing to do with it was take it. Not ask, not offer to partner. Just take it, the way you take something you believe belongs to you by default. Then the rage came. I went to my dad the next morning. I showed him the post. I showed him my files. 8 months of version histories, notes, design mock-ups, all time-stamped. I kept my voice as steady as I could. I said, "Derek posted my work as his own. I need you to help me handle this." My dad looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he said, "You were building this on company time, using company resources. That might make it complicated." I stared at him. "I built it on my own laptop. At night. From home." He said, "Well, we'll talk to Derek." We talked to Derek. Derek said I had told him I was stuck on it and that he was just trying to get some eyes on it and help me out. He said it with complete calm, the way someone tells a story they've been practicing. My dad looked at me and said maybe there had been a miscommunication. My mom said she didn't want this to become a whole thing. I told them it was already a whole thing. That was a Thursday. By the following Monday, something had shifted in the house in a way I still can't fully explain. Derek started being louder about small frictions that had never seemed to bother him before. The way I left dishes in the drying rack. The fact that I took long calls in the kitchen. He told my parents I was difficult to work with, that I was creating tension in the office, that my attitude since the disagreement had made things uncomfortable for the whole team. My mom pulled me aside one evening and said, in the careful voice she used when she was delivering something she didn't want to own, "Maybe you should think about whether this situation is still working for you." I said, "Are you asking me to leave?" She said, "I'm asking you to think about what's best for everyone." I went to bed that night and lay there in the dark in my childhood bedroom and understood what was happening. It wasn't new. It was just the final, most honest version of something that had always been true in our family. When there was a conflict between Derek and me, there was only ever one acceptable outcome. He kept his position. I made room. The difference this time was that I was 27 years old and I had just watched my brother steal something I built and my parents help him rationalize it, and I was done making room. I told my dad the next morning that I was leaving. He nodded, slowly, like he'd already prepared for it. He said, "I think it's probably best." Derek was standing in the hallway and didn't say a word. My mom cried a little at the door and hugged me and whispered that she loved me. I believed her, and it didn't change anything. I drove to Cincinnati that afternoon to stay with my college roommate Danny. She gave me her air mattress and a key and told me to stay as long as I needed. I spent the first week in a kind of suspended state, going through the motions, eating, sleeping, running every morning along the river because I needed somewhere to put the adrenaline. Danny didn't push me to talk. She just kept making coffee and leaving it on the counter and being a steady presence, and that was the right thing. My mom's brother, my Uncle Paul, called me about 10 days after I left. He'd heard something from my mom. Not the real version, I could tell, but enough to make him reach out. He listened for a long time while I told him everything. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Come to Nashville. Get out of Ohio for a while. You can stay in my guest room." Uncle Paul was a contractor himself, actually commercial, a completely different scale than my dad's business, but the same world. He had spent 30 years building things, and he had the particular kind of patience that comes from that. He didn't try to fix what had happened. He just kept pointing me forward. I moved to Nashville that spring. I got a part-time job doing bookkeeping for a small property management company while I figured out my next step. I rebuilt the software from scratch. I didn't want the version Derek had seen. I wanted something better, something that couldn't be confused with anything he had touched. I worked on it in the evenings after Paul went to bed, at the kitchen table, a glass of water, and a legal pad beside the laptop. Paul would come downstairs some nights, see the light on, and just say, "Still at it?" And I would say yes, and he would nod and go back upstairs, and that small acknowledgement felt like more support than I'd had in years. The first version I was willing to show people took about 5 months. I found a meetup for small business owners in Nashville and I started going. I was the youngest person there by 15 years most nights. I just listened, asked questions, learned what problems people were actually living with. 3 of those people agreed to try my software for free. They came back with detailed feedback. I rebuilt again. By month 8 in Nashville, I had a name. I called it Groundwork, and a handful of contractors paying me $60 a month to use it. Not significant money, but real. Actual people choosing to pay for something I made. The problem that almost ended everything came in year 2. I had gotten a small business loan, hired a developer to help me fix the parts of the code I was not qualified to fix, and started to gain some momentum. Then my developer quit, suddenly, with 3 weeks' notice, and took a job at a bigger company. I had 12 paying clients, a product that needed constant maintenance, and no one to do it. I didn't have the money to replace him at market rate. I didn't have the technical skills to cover everything myself. I had about 6 weeks before things started breaking. I have a harder time talking about those 6 weeks than I do about anything else in this story because there was nothing dramatic about them. It was just grinding fear, every day, getting up and working the problem, posting in developer forums, emailing every contact I had, calling Paul at midnight twice, not even because he could solve it, just because I needed to say out loud what was happening. I found someone, a freelancer named Marcus who was between contracts and willing to work at a rate I could almost afford. He stayed for 6 months, long enough to stabilize everything and train me on the parts I most needed to understand. We are still in contact. I sent him a bottle of whiskey when the company crossed its first million in revenue. By year 3, I was in Austin. The Nashville contractor community had been good to me, but the Austin market was different. Younger, faster growing, more new residential construction per square foot than almost anywhere in the country. I subleased half a floor in a building in East Austin and started cold emailing every residential contractor in a 50-mile radius. The company grew in the way that real growth happens, which is nothing like it sounds when you tell it afterward. It was slow and then fast and then slow again. It was months where I questioned every decision I'd made and months where everything I tried seemed to work. I hired my first full-time employee when Groundwork crossed 500 clients. By the end of year 4, we had a team of 11, a real office, and $4.2 million in annual recurring revenue. I didn't send anyone in my family a press release. I wasn't tracking their reactions. I had been living in a different world than they were for 3 years, and I had stopped measuring my progress by what they might think of it. But information travels, even when you don't send it. My Aunt Karen, my dad's sister, who had always been kind to me in a distant, slightly oblivious way, had seen something about Groundwork in a local Austin feature that got picked up by a contractor trade publication. She called to congratulate me, genuinely, warmly. She asked good questions. I told her the broad strokes. I don't know exactly what she shared or with whom, but I know how families work. Word got back. My mom called on a Tuesday morning in October. I was at my desk in the middle of something and I almost didn't pick up. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 8 months. I picked up. Her voice was warm in the particular way that means someone is performing warmth at a volume they hope will cover something else. She told me she had heard wonderful things. She told me she was so proud. She told me that family doesn't stay broken forever and that she'd been thinking a lot and that she believed we were meant to find our way back to each other. I waited. I knew the pivot was coming. It came in the form of a question about whether I was in a position to help her and my dad. There were some debts, she said. Some things that had accumulated. Mercerbuilt had gone through a rough stretch. It would only be temporary, just to get them stable. I said, "Mom, I have to ask you something first. What happened to my software?" A pause. "Derek's thing it didn't go anywhere." "I know it didn't," I said. "That's not what I asked." She said it was a long time ago and things were complicated back then. and she hoped we could put it behind us and focus on where we were now. I told her I needed a few days to think. I called Uncle Paul that night. He had moved from Nashville to Knoxville the previous year, and we talked every few weeks. I told him about the call. He listened and said, almost word for word, what I expected him to say, which was, "You don't owe them anything." Then he said something I didn't expect. He said, "But if you want to meet with them, do it. Not for them. For yourself." Sometimes you need to say the thing out loud to know you're really done. I thought about that for a long time. I told my mom they could come to Austin. They drove down on a Saturday. My mom, my dad, and Derek, which I hadn't been told to expect. I opened the door, and there they were on my porch, all three of them. My mom holding a tin of cookies she'd baked, my dad with his hands in his pockets. Derek standing slightly behind them with the expression of someone who has already decided how this conversation will go. I did not invite them inside. I had decided this beforehand, thinking about what the comments under every story like mine say. The people who watched from the outside and said what they wished the person had done. I had thought about it, and I had decided they were right. This was my space. I had built it. They did not get to walk through it. We sat on the porch furniture. I brought out water. I did not make it comfortable in the ways I once would have. I didn't turn on the outdoor lights. I didn't offer the cookies back on a nice plate. My mom started with the debt situation. It was real. I had done some quiet checking after her call. Mercer Built had lost 2 big clients in the past year, and they were carrying payments they couldn't cover. She laid it out carefully, reasonably. The way she laid out everything she needed you to do. She talked about what the business had meant to our dad, what it had meant to our family, how maybe there was a way I could help them restructure, maybe even come back in some capacity. My dad nodded along. He looked older than I remembered, and I felt the old pull of wanting to fix that. I had spent my whole childhood trying to do things that would make him look at me the way he looked at Derek. I recognized the pull and I didn't follow it. Then I looked at Derek. "Before we talk about anything else," I said, "I want to talk about what you did." He shifted in his chair. "Rachel, you took my work. 8 months of my work. You posted it as yours without asking me, without telling me, without acknowledging any part of what I'd done. And when I called it out, you lied to Mom and Dad and they believed you. And then they pushed me out. I want to hear what you have to say about that." He said it was more complicated than that. He said he thought we were collaborating. He said a lot of things I had already heard versions of in my head over the past 4 years. The explanations that weren't explanations. The justifications that treated my work as something that existed in the communal space he had a right to access. I let him finish. Then I said, "I have the timestamps. I have every version of every file. I have the original notes going back 14 months before you posted that pitch deck. There was no collaboration. You took it." My mom started to say something about how we didn't need to relitigate the past. My dad looked at his water glass. "Here is what I want to say to all 3 of you," I said. "I left Akron 4 years ago with less than $2,000 and a laptop. I have not taken a single thing from any of you since that day. Everything I have built, I built without you. And I am glad I did, because building it without you is how I know it's actually mine." I paused. "I am not going to help with the business debt. I am not coming back to Mercer Built. I don't have a version of a relationship with you right now that makes sense to me, and I'm not willing to manufacture one because you need something." My mom's face crumpled a little. My dad said quietly, "We made mistakes." "I know," I said, "but knowing that doesn't mean I owe you a rescue." Derek said nothing. He looked out at the yard. I told them they were welcome to drive back to Akron, and I hoped the drive was safe. I stood up. That was the end of the conversation. They left. I went inside and sat at my kitchen table for a while in the quiet. I didn't feel victorious. I want to be honest about that because I think stories like this are supposed to end with the person feeling powerful and free and vindicated, and the truth is, it's more complicated. I felt sad. I felt sad about my dad's face and the 4 years and the tin of cookies my mom had brought. I felt sad in the way you feel sad when something you held out a small private hope for finally proves it was never going to happen. But underneath that, clear and steady, was something I don't have a better word for than peace. I had said the true thing. I had not softened it for their comfort. I had not bargained my own clarity away for the possibility of being loved by people who had chosen, again and again, not to choose me. That felt like enough. I found out through Aunt Karen a few months later that Mercer Built had been sold. Not in a good way. More of a fire sale situation. Sold to cover what they owed. My parents had moved into a smaller place. Derek had gone back to doing project management work for someone else. The kind of work he'd always done before my dad handed him a title. Karen told me without editorializing, and I received it the same way. I didn't feel satisfaction, exactly. I felt something more like the absence of something. The absence of the version of the story where I spent my life being less than Derek so they could all feel comfortable. That version of my life was gone, and something else was in its place. Uncle Paul came to visit Austin in the spring. We walked around the neighborhood I'd moved into. One of those Austin neighborhoods where old bungalows sit next to new builds, where the live oaks are enormous and spread their branches over everything. He bought me breakfast at a diner where they bring you coffee in real mugs, and he asked about the company and listened to all of it. Before he left, he said, "I always knew you were going to build something." I asked him why. He said, "Because you were always paying attention to the right things. What needed fixing? What wasn't working? You saw problems and you wanted to solve them." Derek always saw problems and wanted to assign them to someone else. I thought about that on my porch that night after he'd gone back to his hotel. The sky in Austin in spring is this particular shade at dusk, pink going into soft gray, and the neighborhood was quiet except for someone's dog a few doors down. I thought about the version of me who sat in that kitchen in Akron with her laptop at midnight, building something in the margins of a life that didn't have much space for her. That person worked so hard. She deserved better than what she got, and she built her way there anyway. My team at Groundwork is doing something I'm proud of. We are making it easier for people to run the kinds of businesses that don't get written about in magazines. The 2-person crews doing kitchen remodels, the contractors working 6 days a week trying to give their families something stable. We are fixing the back-office chaos that cost my dad money for 15 years and that I saw up close and decided I could solve. There is something satisfying about that specific fact. That the thing I built grew directly from the years I spent being overlooked in my father's business. That the problem I understood well enough to solve was a problem I understood because no one thought my role was important enough to explain things to me, so I figured them out myself. I don't think I would have built it the same way if I hadn't been pushed out. I don't know if that's a silver lining, or just what you tell yourself to make the shape of things feel like it was always pointing somewhere. What I know is this: I have never waited for permission I wasn't going to get. I have never given more of myself to people who were not willing to meet me. I have learned to tell the difference between belonging and accommodation, between people who see you and people who have simply gotten used to having you around. Uncle Paul, Danny in the air mattress and the Cincinnati mornings, Marcus in the code and the whiskey I still owe him a second bottle of, the contractors in Nashville who gave me honest feedback and kept showing up to those Tuesday meetups. My team in Austin who work hard and build things that matter. That is my family. That is the one I made. To everyone who found this and took the time to listen, I see you. If you are in the middle of something that feels like it's going to break you, I want to tell you what nobody told me when I was on Danny's air mattress with less than $2,000 and no idea what came next. You are already doing the hardest part. The building comes after. But the decision to leave the place that kept making you smaller, that is the thing that has to happen first, and it is the bravest thing. You don't need their permission to start. I promise you don't. I've had 4 years to sit with what happened, and the thing I keep coming back to isn't the betrayal itself. It's how long I let the conditions that made it possible just exist, how long I accepted being the person in the room whose contributions were optional, whose presence was convenient, whose work was available to be picked up and claimed by someone who had more standing in that family, simply because he'd been handed it first. Derek didn't steal from me because he was uniquely cruel. He did it because nothing in our family had ever taught him there would be a cost. When you grow up watching someone be excused from consequences, when you watch every room reorganize itself around their comfort, you start to believe that the world works that way, that things belong to you when you want them, and that other people's objections are just noise to be managed. That's not an excuse. It's just the shape of what our parents built without realizing it. The cost of that got paid eventually, and it wasn't paid by me. What I understand now that I didn't at 27 is that how you respond to injustice either shrinks you or clarifies you. There's no neutral. When my parents chose Derek's version of events over mine, I had a choice: absorb it, soften it, find a way to stay small enough to keep the peace, or let it be exactly as wrong as it was, and let that wrongness become fuel. I chose fuel. I didn't choose it gracefully or immediately. I chose it on Danny's air mattress at 2 in the morning, crying into a pillow, not feeling brave at all. Bravery almost never feels like bravery when you're in it. It mostly feels like not having any other option you can live with. Uncle Paul used to say that what you build reveals what you actually understand. I built groundwork because I had spent years in the back office of a family business that didn't value what I was doing, which meant I had to understand it completely on my own. I had no one explaining things to me, no mentor, no credit, no path forward. So I paid close attention to everything. That attention became the foundation of something real. The invisibility I resented turned out to be the exact condition I needed to learn what I learned. That's not a comfortable lesson because it requires you to hold two things at once. What was done to you was genuinely wrong, and it also gave you something nothing else could have. Those two things don't cancel each other out, they're both true. What I want to say to the people listening is this: integrity compounds. Every time you do the work honestly, every time you resist the shortcut, every time you choose the harder path because the easier one requires you to take something that isn't yours, that accumulates, and every time you do the opposite, that accumulates too. Derek learned that. My parents are learning it in quieter ways. The business my dad spent 30 years building is gone, and the shape of how it ended is connected, directly, to the choices they made when it mattered. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because it's true, and because I think the truth of it is actually useful if you're willing to look at it clearly. You are building something right now whether you know it or not. Every choice you make about how to treat people, how to handle what isn't going your way, how to respond when the room doesn't see you, those are all materials. What gets built out of them is entirely up to you.